Now we're going to analyze a supply shock to this market. Okay, so let's set up our figure again, and we're going to set it up in the long run equilibrium once again. Okay, so that means we're going to find a point where demand, supply, and long run supply are all equal to each other. We got to carry this back over here to draw the diagram correctly. We need to draw a marginal cost that has the same shape as the supply curve, and then we need to draw average cost cutting right through marginal cost at that point. Okay? So here's where we are. All right, we're in our long run equilibrium. What shifts supply? And again, this is where it's useful to remember where supply comes from. Supply comes from the cost function, right? And the cost function comes from solving the Lagrangian, where we add up the input costs and we have our production function here. Okay? So what shifts supply? Very clearly input costs. Okay? If the price of labor goes up and the price of capital goes up, then the cost is going to go up, and that's going to raise our marginal cost. Okay. Another thing would be the nature of technology, so the production function. If someone invents a new and more efficient way to produce goods, that will affect this whole equation, and that will affect the cost structure. Usually we think of technological progress as pushing costs down, but it can do that in kind of interesting ways, and we'll go through an example here. We can also have the number of firms be in here. So if there are, in the as we've said, this is mostly determined by, in the long run, the number of firms is actually determined by the long run supply and demand. But in the short run, we can imagine like a surge and influx of new people in this market that affects the price, and we can go back to our long run equilibrium. What doesn't change supply is things that change demand. So if there's a change in the price of your competition, that affects demand, that affects prices, that affects quantities, but it doesn't affect your marginal costs. Supply is all about costs, production, and sort of like what's going on inside a firm. Okay, so let's suppose that a new technology emerges that is more efficient than the old one, but only at very large scale. Okay, so this new production technology looks like this. It's got an average cost down here, and because it's got a new average cost, we have to draw a new marginal cost that cuts through the bottom here. Let's suppose the new marginal cost looks kind of like this. We can have marginal costs that have strange shapes. That's okay. What is going on here? Well, let's suppose that all the firms that are in the market convert to this new production technique. They all upgrade to this new production model. Okay. If they're at the initial outset, the first thing that happens is that the change in marginal cost, the change in the shape, is also going to change the shape of the supply curve. Okay, so let's suppose it changes sort of like, where am I going here? Here we are. Let's suppose this is the new supply curve. I tried to copy the shape of that one there. Okay, that's going to have cost decrease a bit here. Okay, so what's going on here? These firms all expand their output because price, not there. We take this price back over here, and the first thing that happens is price falls. And firms increase their output from Q1 to Q2. Okay, that increases the supply in the whole market. This is sort of not looking totally to scale, but bear with me. But this is not going to be a sustainable long-run equilibrium because price is above average cost. This new, more efficient market is going to induce new firms to enter, and we have a new long-run supply because we have a new minimum cost. Okay, so as new firms enter, cost falls, and the supply that firms make drops down to here. So we go from here down to here. And the total quantity goes up from Q1 to Q2 to Q3. Okay. So what happened in this market? A new, more efficient way to produce this good led to bigger firms because it turns out it's now more efficient to operate at a larger scale. It also led to it potentially led to fewer big firms, though, than we had before, because the total quantity is bigger, and so is the amount supplied by each firm, and we don't really know which one. I guess in this case, the total number of firms is still increased. We can say that because when we were here, firms were making positive profits, which means more firms would have entered. And so we end up with more bigger firms than we had before and a lot more stuff and lower prices for consumers. And that's how it all got shaken out in this case. All right, I should draw the final price over here. So this is the kind of stuff that these models are really good for, analyzing how a market responds in both the short run and the long run to all sorts of shocks, to things that affect the consumers and things that affect the firms. Okay? We'll do an example in the next one.